The air in Eldridge, Ohio, carried a bite, even in the waning warmth of October. It was a small town, the kind where secrets didn't stay buried long, where every face was familiar and every story was shared over coffee at Mabel's diner, nestled between endless cornfields and a slow-moving river that smelled faintly of rust. Eldridge was unremarkable to anyone just passing through. A single stoplight flickered at the town's heart, and the annual fair, with its creaking Ferris wheel and sticky cotton candy, was the biggest event of the year. But beneath the surface of potlucks and Friday night football, there was a shadow. It wasn't something you could name, not a person or a place, but a feeling that clung to the edges of Eldridge, like damp rot. And at the center of that shadow stood the Whitaker house. The house sat at the end of Sycamore Lane, where the pavement crumbled into gravel and the streetlights hadn't worked in years. It was a sagging Victorian, 2 stories of weathered gray paint and narrow windows that seemed to watch you back. The porch leaned like it might collapse under its own weight, and the iron gate creaked on rusted hinges. Locals avoided it, not out of fear exactly, but out of instinct. They'd say it gave them the chills, but no one ever stayed long. Kids dared each other to touch the gate, but the brave ones came back quiet, their eyes distant. Old-timers whispered about lights flickering in empty rooms, footsteps in the attic when no one was home. The Whitaker house wasn't just a building, it was a story, one Eldridge told in hushed tones. The Whitaker family arrived in spring 2018, outsiders in a town that didn't trust strangers. John Whitaker was a broad man in his 40s, with a grip that could crush walnuts, and a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd been a mechanic in Columbus, before taking a job at the tire factory just outside town. His wife Clara was quieter, her nervous smile betraying a constant unease, like she was waiting for bad news. Their daughter Emily, 16, had dyed black hair and a tongue sharp enough to cut through small talk. She'd roll her eyes at teachers and stare down bullies, but there was a softness in her when she thought no one was looking. Lucas, their 12-year-old son, was all knees and elbows, always clutching a sketchbook filled with drawings no one could quite understand. Twisted trees, faceless figures, houses that looked too much like the one they lived in. The Whitakers kept to themselves, polite but distant, never lingering at Mabel's or joining the church choir. They were a puzzle Eldridge couldn't solve. It was October 12, 2018, when the puzzle became a nightmare. The night was sharp, the stars bright enough to sting. Eldridge had settled into its usual rhythm, families tucked in, TVs glowing with football games. The Whitaker house was dark, or so people thought. No one noticed anything strange, not until the scream. Miss Integrove, a retired schoolteacher who lived a quarter-mile down Sycamore Lane, was up late with a worn copy of Wuthering Heights. When it happened, the scream tore through the quiet, raw and desperate, like something being ripped apart. It wasn't a kid playing a prank or a startled shout. It was pain, pure and unfiltered. Her book hit the floor, her heart hammering. She waited, ears straining, but the night went still again, unnaturally so. She told herself it was a fox, maybe a bad dream, but sleep didn't come that night. She didn't call the police. She'd regret that forever. By morning, the town was stirring. Tommy Brewer, the mail carrier, who doubled as Eldridge's gossip hub, noticed the Whitakers' mailbox overflowing. Letters from the day before were still there, which wasn't like Clara, who always grabbed the mail promptly. Tommy mentioned it at Mabel's, where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the regulars were hungry for news. By noon, half the town was buzzing. Had the Whitakers left town? Were they sick? Curiosity turned to unease, and by evening, Sheriff Dan Cutler decided to check on them. Cutler was a lanky man nearing 60, with a mustache that belonged in a cowboy movie, and a no-nonsense air. He'd seen it all in Eldridge. Runaway teens, bar fights, lost dogs. But something about the Whitaker house made his skin prickle. He pulled up to Sycamore Lane. As dusk settled, the house looming against a blood-red sky, the air felt thick like a storm was coming. Though the forecast was clear, he knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. The windows were dark, the curtains still. He tried the door. It was unlocked. "John, Clara, anybody home?" he called, stepping inside. The smell hit him first, sharp, metallic, like a handful of coin. His flashlight swept the living room. A coffee mug on the table. Clara's knitting. Abandoned on the couch. Everything untouched but wrong. The house was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. In the kitchen he found the blood streaks smeared across the linoleum. Not a pool, but enough to turn his stomach. They trailed to the back door, which hung slightly open, letting in a cold draft. His hand went to his radio, his voice steady but his pulse racing. "This is Cutler. I need backup at the Whitaker place now." Deputies arrived within the hour, their flashlights cutting through the dark. They searched every inch: bedrooms, closets, attic, basement. More blood turned up, drops on the stairs, a smear in the upstairs hallway, a few splatters on Emily's bed, but no body. No John, no Clara, no Emily, no Lucas. The car was in the driveway, keys on the kitchen counter. Their phones were lined up on the dining table, powered off like they'd been placed there deliberately. No signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no weapons. It was as if the Whitakers had walked into the night and dissolved. By morning, Eldridge was alive with rumors. Mabel's was packed, the air thick with cigarette smoke and wild theories. Maybe John had debts, owed the wrong people. Maybe Clara was running from a past no one knew about. Emily, with her sharp edges, could have gotten mixed up with troublemakers from the next town over. And Lucas, well, no one knew what to make of his strange drawings, the ones he'd shown at the school art fair, full of spiraling shapes and eyeless faces. The old-timers sipping coffee in the corner brought up the house itself. Back in 1957, Harold Grayson lived there, a carpenter who kept to himself until he vanished without a trace. No body, no note, nothing. The house sat empty for years after, and every family who tried to make it a home left quickly, muttering about noises, shadows, dreams that felt too real. The Whitakers had lasted 6 months longer than most. The state police arrived on day 2, bringing dogs and forensic hits. They combed the woods, dragged the river, tested the blood. It was human, type O positive, matching John and Emily's records from the factory's health screening. But there wasn't enough to suggest death, just violence. The trails led nowhere. The kitchen streaks stopped at the back door, as if whoever left them had stepped into thin air. Emily's bed had fresh drops, but her window was locked from the inside. The phones held no clues. A dentist reminder for Clara, a group chat where Emily teased her friends about a dance. John's toolbox sat untouched in the garage, his propane torch still in its case. In the basement they found a box of old photos, sepia-toned strangers, staring out. One dated 1923 with a note, "They never leave." Deputy Sarah Miles, young and superstitious, bagged it as evidence, though Cutler scoffed. Upstairs, Emily's notebook was filled with jagged poetry, lines about shadows, doors to nowhere, hands reaching from walls. Lucas's sketchbook was worse. Pages of spiraling shapes, houses with too many windows, figures without faces. One drawing, dated October 11, showed 4 stick figures holding hands in a circle, red ink splattered across them like blood. The attic smelled faintly of burnt paper, though nothing was found. The dogs refused to enter the basement, whining and pulling back. Even the forensics team felt it, a weight in the air, like the house was watching. Eldridge began to unravel. Neighbors who'd once shared casseroles now locked their doors. Mrs. Hargrove, haunted by the scream, stopped sleeping. Kids avoided Sycamore Lane. At Mabel's the chatter turned dark. Cults, drifters, even the house itself. Earl Jenkins, an old farmer with a memory as long as his beard, told anyone who'd listen about Grayson. "That house don't let go," he said, tapping his mug. "It takes what it wants." Most laughed it off, but no one lingered near the Whitaker house. After dark, Sheriff Cutler kept going back, searching for something he'd missed. Late one night, alone in the living room, he heard it, a creak, not from the floor, but from the walls, like a pulse. He told no one. The town didn't need more fuel for its fears, but as the days passed, the questions grew heavier. Where were the Whitakers? What happened in those blood-streaked hours? And why did the house feel alive, waiting for its next move? Eldridge wasn't done with this mystery, and the Whitaker house wasn't done with Eldridge. The days after the Whitakers vanished felt like a fever dream in Eldridge, Ohio. The town, once content with its sleepy routines, was now a hive of whispers and sidelong glances. Mabel's diner stayed packed, but the usual banter about crops and football had been replaced by hushed theories about blood, screams, and the house on Sycamore Lane. The Whitaker house stood silent, its windows dark, but it loomed over the town like a bruise that wouldn't fade. Sheriff Dan Cutler, with his weathered face and cowboy mustache, was drowning in questions he couldn't answer. The state police had set up shop in the town hall, their radios crackling with updates that led nowhere. The blood in the house, human type O positive, matched John and Emily Whitaker, but there wasn't enough to prove death, only violence. The family's phones lined up on the dining table like some eerie ritual, held no clues. The car hadn't moved. The woods and river gave up nothing. Eldridge was a town that prided itself on knowing everything, but this mystery was a locked door. Cutler wasn't sleeping. He'd been back to the Whitaker house every day since the discovery, walking its creaking halls, chasing shadows. The blood streaks in the kitchen haunted him, smeared, like someone had tried to wipe them away, trailing to the back door before stopping cold. He'd stood there at midnight, flashlight in hand, staring at the spot where the trail ended, half expecting the house to whisper an answer. It did. Instead, it gave him that feeling again, the one he wouldn't admit to anyone. The house was alive, watching, waiting. He shook it off, blamed it on too much coffee and too little rest, but the creak he'd heard in the walls that first night lingered in his mind like a splinter. The investigation was slipping through his fingers. The state police, led by a sharp-eyed detective named Karen Voss, were methodical but impatient. Voss was all business, her city accent cutting through Eldridge's drawl like a blade. She didn't buy the town's ghost stories about the Whitaker house, dismissing talk of Harold Grayson's disappearance in '57 or the families who fled after. "Blood doesn't lie," she told Cutler, "but houses don't kill." She focused on the facts. No bodies, no forced entry, no witnesses, except Mrs. Hargrove's scream. Voss leaned toward a domestic angle. Maybe John Whitaker snapped, hurt his family and fled. But Cutler wasn't so sure. John had been steady, a man who fixed engines and paid his bills. Clara, nervous as she was, didn't seem the type to push him over the edge. And the kids, Emily was trouble in a teenage way, not a violent one. Lucas, with his strange drawings, was just a quiet kid, or so Cutler thought. The town wasn't helping. Eldridge had turned on itself, suspicion creeping into every conversation. At Mabel's, Tommy Brewer, the mail carrier, swore he'd seen a strange car near Sycamore Lane a week before the disappearance. A black sedan, no plates, gone by the time he circled back. No one else corroborated it, but the story spread. Mrs. Hargrove, still shaken, started telling anyone who'd listened that the scream wasn't human, more like a warning from something else. Earl Jenkins, the old farmer, doubled down on his tales of the house, claiming Grayson's disappearance wasn't the only one. Back in '23, he said, nursing his coffee, a whole family went missing from that place. The Millers left nothing but a broken clock and some red stains on the porch. No one could verify it. Eldridge's records from that far back were spotty, but it didn't matter. The story took root. Cutler's deputies were stretched thin, chasing leads that crumbled like dry leaves. Deputy Sarah Miles, the youngest on the force, was the only one who seemed to feel the house's weight as much as Cutler did. She'd bagged that old photo from the basement,
the one with "They Never Leave" scrawled on the back, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. She'd also found something else in the Whitakers' attic. A small charred piece of paper, tucked behind a rafter, barely legible. It looked like a list, written in shaky handwriting. Names, dates, none familiar. The last entry read, Whitaker. Sarah showed it to Cutler, who frowned and handed it to Voss. The detective shrugged, calling it a coincidence, but Sarah wasn't so sure. She started digging into the house's history, pulling records from the county office, though most were incomplete, lost time or neglect. The first real break came on day 5. A kid from Emily's school, a wiry junior named Caleb Reed, came forward. He was nervous, fidgeting in the station's cramped interview room, his acne-scarred face pale. Caleb said Emily had been acting strange the week before she vanished. She'd stopped hanging out with her usual crowd, started sneaking off after school. Once he'd seen her near the woods behind the house, talking to someone, a man maybe, though it was too dark to tell. She looked scared, Caleb said, his voice cracking. Not like her. He didn't tell anyone at the time, afraid of getting her in trouble. Voss pressed him hard, but Caleb swore he didn't know more. The woods were searched again. Nothing. Then there was Lucas's sketchbook. Sarah had kept it, flipping through its pages at night when she couldn't sleep. The drawings were unsettling, spirals that seemed to move if you stared too long, houses with impossible angles, figures without faces. One page, dated the day before the disappearance, showed a family of 4 standing in a circle, their hands joined, red ink splattered across them like blood. Another sketch, tucked near the back, showed a door in a wall, no frame, no handle, just a slab of black. Under it, in Lucas's childish scrawl, was one word, open. Sarah showed it to Cutler, who stared at it longer than he meant to. Kids got an imagination, he muttered, but his voice was unsteady. Voss shifted focus to the family's past. She pulled records from Columbus, digging into John and Clara's lives before Eldridge. John had a clean record, just a speeding ticket from Clara, though, had gaps, years where she seemed to disappear from public records. No address, no job. Voss wondered if she was running from something, an ex, a debt, a crime. The kids' school files were sparse. Emily had been disciplined twice for mouthing off, but her grades were solid. Lucas was a straight-A student, but his teachers noted he was withdrawn, overly focused on his art. Voss sent a team to Columbus to chase leads, but Cutler's gut told him the answer wasn't there. It was here, in Eldridge, in that house. The town's fear was turning to anger. At a packed town hall meeting, residents demanded answers. Why hadn't Cutler found the family? Why was the house still standing? Some called for it to be burned down, half serious. Others, like Mrs. Hargrove, spoke of curses, of the land itself being wrong. Voss shut them down. Her voice clipped. We're dealing with facts, not fairy tales. But even she was rattled when a new clue surfaced. A farmer, checking his fields near Sycamore Lane, found a piece of cloth caught in a fence. A strip of Emily's favorite band t-shirt, torn and stained with blood. The dogs were brought back, but they lost the scent at the edge of the woods. The cloth was fresh, no more than a day old, which didn't make sense. The Whitakers had been gone a week. Sarah kept digging into the house's past. She found a newspaper clipping from 1972 buried in the county archives. A family, the Carters, had lived in the Whitaker house for 3 months before leaving abruptly. The article quoted the mother, Ellen Carter, saying they'd heard voices at night, whispers from the wall. Their son, 8 at the time, claimed he saw a man in the basement, tall and gray with no eyes. The Carters moved to Indiana and never came back. Sarah tracked down the son, now in his 50s, living in Indianapolis. Over the phone, his voice was low, hesitant. That house, he said, it doesn't let you go. It waits. He hung up before she could ask more. Cutler was starting to crack. He'd always prided himself on keeping Eldridge safe, but this was different. Late one night, he went back to the house alone, against Voss's order. The air inside was colder than it should have been, the metallic smell stronger. He stood in the kitchen, staring at the blood streaks, when he heard it again, a creak, rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the walls. He followed it upstairs to Lucas's room, where the sketchbook had been found. The air felt heavy, pressing against his chest. He opened the closet, half expecting something to lunge out. Nothing did, but on the back wall, hidden behind a pile of clothes, was a mark. A faint carved symbol, like a spiral with a slash through it. It matched one of Lucas's drawings. He called Sarah, who arrived with her flashlight and a camera. They photographed the symbol, but when they checked the images later, it was blurry, like the camera couldn't focus. Voss dismissed it as vandalism, but Sarah wasn't convinced. She cross-referenced the symbol with Lucas's sketches, and found it in 3 drawings, each labeled with a single word: door. The word sent a chill through her. She remembered the black door in Lucas's sketchbook, the one with no hand. She started checking the house's walls, tapping for hollow spots, but found nothing. Yet the feeling grew stronger. The house was hiding something. By the 10th day, Eldridge was a powder keg. A vigil was held outside the Whittaker house, candles flickering in the October wind. People prayed for the family, but their eyes darted to the windows, half expecting to see a face. Mrs. Hargrove stood at the back, clutching her rosary, muttering about the scream. Tommy Brewer told anyone who'd listen about the Black City. Earl Jenkins just shook his head, saying, "It's the house, always been the house." Cutler watched from a distance, his hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of a town slipping away. Voss was pushing for a suspect, someone to pin it on, but Cutler knew it wasn't that simple. The blood, the drawings, the symbol, the house, it was all connected, and the answer was close, just out of reach. That night, Sarah stayed late at the station, poring over her notes. She found another clipping, this one from 1923, mentioning the Miller family. They'd lived in the house for a year before disappearing. No bodies, no trace, just a broken clock, and red stains on the porch. Like Earl had said, the article quoted a neighbor. It was like the house swallowed them. Sarah's heart raced. She grabbed her flashlight and headed to the Whittaker house. Alone, she didn't tell Cutler. She didn't tell anyone. The night was moonless, the air thick with fog. As she stepped inside, the house seemed to breathe, the walls creaking softly. She climbed to the attic, where the burnt paper smell was strongest. There, in the corner, she saw it, a faint outline in the wall, like a door. No handle, no frame, just like Lucas's drawing. Her hand reached out, trembling, and the house went silent.
The fog clung to Eldridge like a shroud as Deputy Sarah Miles stood in the attic of the Whittaker house, her flashlight beam trembling on the faint outline of a door in the wall. It was just as Lucas Whittaker had drawn it. No handle, no frame, just a slab of darkness etched into the wood. The air was thick, the burnt paper smell sharp enough to sting her eyes. The house was silent, but it wasn't the quiet of an empty place. It was the hush of something listening. Her fingers hovered over the outline, heart pounding, half expecting the wall to give way. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she backed away, her boots scuffing the dusty floor, and ran to her cruiser. She didn't tell Sheriff Cutler or Detective Voss about the door. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because it felt like a secret the house wanted her to keep. By morning, Eldridge was a town on edge. The vigil outside the Whittaker house had done little to calm nerves. Candles had burned out, leaving wax stains on the gravel, and the crowd's prayers had turned to arguments. Some wanted the house torn down, others demanded answers about the blood, the family, the scream. Mabel's diner was a pressure cooker, with Tommy Brewer spinning tales of his mystery sedan and Mrs. Hargrove clutching her rosary, insisting the scream was a warning from beyond. Old Earl Jenkins, sipping his third coffee, muttered about the house's history, now adding the Miller's disappearance in 1923 to his list of proof. "It's not just a house," he said, his voice low. "It's a trap." No one laughed this time. Sheriff Cutler was unraveling. The creak he'd heard in the walls haunted him. waking him in the night with the sense that something was pacing, just out of sight. He hadn't told Voss about the symbol in Lucas's closet, the spiral with a slash through it, but he'd sketched it in his notebook, staring at it, until his eyes burned. Detective Voss was pushing for a suspect, her patience thinning. She'd returned from Columbus, with fragments of the Whitakers' past. John had a distant cousin with a petty theft record, but no ties to violence. Clara's missing years was still a blank 3 years in her 20s, where she'd vanished from records. No job, no address. Voss was convinced Clara was the key, maybe hiding from an old life that had caught up, but Cutler wasn't buying it. The house was the key, he just didn't know how to prove it. Sarah, meanwhile, was chasing her own leads. The door in the attic gnawed at her. She'd gone back to Lucas's sketchbook, finding the drawing of the door labeled open. It wasn't just a child's scribble. The lines were precise, obsessive, like Lucas had seen it in his dreams. She cross-referenced it with the charred paper she'd found, the one with names and dates, ending with Whitaker. The other names were older. Miller, 1923. Grayson, 1957. Carter, 1972. She dug deeper, pulling county records late into the night. The Millers had been a family of 5, gone without a trace. Grayson, the carpenter, left behind a half-finished chair and a locked shed. The Carters fled after their son saw a gray man in the basement. Each story ended the same. No bodies, no answers, just the house. The investigation took a turn on day 12. A hiker in the woods, a mile from Sycamore Lane, found a shoe. Lucas's sneaker, scuffed but intact. No blood, no tears. It was half buried under leaves, like it had been dropped in a hurry. The state police swept the area again, dogs sniffing frantically, but the trail went cold at a creek bed. Voss was skeptical, saying it could have been there for weeks. But Cutler knew better. Lucas hadn't been seen without those sneakers, bright blue with yellow laces, a gift from his dad. The discovery lit a fire under the town. At Mabel's, the theories grew darker. Kidnapping, a serial killer, even human trafficking. But Sarah kept thinking about the door, the symbol, the drawings. She didn't tell Voss. She wasn't sure who to trust anymore. Cutler called a meeting at the station, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Voss laid out the evidence. The blood, typo positive, likely John or Emily's. The cloth from Emily's t-shirt. Lucas's shoe. The phones, eerily arranged. The lack of forced entry. She was building a case for John as the culprit. A stressed father, maybe pushed too far, who hurt his family, and staged a disappearance. But there were holes. No motive. No history of violence. No bodies. Cutler pushed back, mentioning the house's history. The photo, would they never leave? Voss rolled her eyes. You're sounding like the diner crowd, she snapped. Sarah stayed quiet, her mind on the attic. That afternoon, Sarah tracked down Caleb Reed, the kid who'd seen Emily in the woods. He was at Eldridge High, shooting hoops alone in the gym. His eyes darted when she asked about the man Emily was with. I didn't see his face, Caleb said, dribbling the ball too fast. It was dark, maybe 8 o'clock. She was by the trees, talking low, like she didn't want anyone to hear. He paused, then added, she had a bag with her, like a backpack. Sarah pressed him, but he clammed up, swearing he'd told her everything. She left feeling uneasy. A backpack meant Emily might have planned to leave, but with her back at the station, Sarah pulled Emily's school records again. A teacher's note mentioned Emily had been distracted lately, caught writing in a journal during class. The journal wasn't among the evidence from the house. Sarah wondered if it was in that back. She drove to the Whitaker house, her third visit that day, ignoring the knot in her stomach. The house felt different in daylight, less menacing, but no less alive. She searched Emily's room, checking under the bed, behind the dresser, anywhere a journal might be hidden. Nothing. But in the corner, under a loose floorboard, she found a small metal box. Inside was a key, old, tarnished,
with the same spiral symbol etched into it. Her breath caught. It wasn't in the police inventory. Someone had missed it. Sarah didn't tell Cutler or Voss. Instead, she went back to the attic, the key heavy in her pocket. The door outline was still there, faint, but undeniable. She traced it with her finger, half expecting the wall to shift. It didn't. She tried the key in every lock in the house. Front door, back door, closets. It fit not. Frustrated, she sat on the attic floor, staring at the wall. That's when she noticed the smell again. Burnt paper, stronger now. She followed it to a corner, where the floorboards were slightly raised. Prying them up, she found a bundle of letters, tied with twine, half charred. The handwriting was old, the ink faded, but one word stood out: door. Her hands shook as she untied the bundle. The letters were addressed to no one, signed by no one, but they described the house in chilling detail. Whispers in the walls, shadows that moved, a door that appeared at night. Meanwhile, Cutler was chasing his own ghosts. He'd gone back to Lucas's room, drawn to the symbol in the closet. He hadn't told Voss, but he'd started sketching it everywhere. His notepad, his desk, even the margins of reports. It felt like a code he was close to cracking. He called the Indianapolis man Sarah had spoken to, the Carter boy, who'd seen the gray man in the 70s. The man, now named Tom Carter, was reluctant, but confirmed his story. He wasn't human, Tom said, his voice flat, too tall, too thin, no eyes. He stood in the basement, pointing at the wall, like he was waiting for something to open. Cutler asked about a door. Tom went silent, then said, "Don't go looking for it. It finds you." The line went dead. The town was fracturing. A second vigil turned ugly, when a group of teenagers threw rocks at the Whitaker house, shattering a window. Voss wanted to arrest them, but Cutler let it slide. Eldridge was a powder keg, and he didn't need a spark. At Mabel's, Tommy Brewer's sedan story had grown into a full-blown conspiracy about a cult operating in the woods. Mrs. Hargrove stopped leaving her house, convinced the scream was a message from God. Earl Jenkins, ever the prophet, started talking about the land's hunger, claiming the house was just a symptom of something older, deeper. Cutler ignored him, but Sarah was starting to wonder. On day 15, a new clue surfaced. A hunter found a scrap of paper in the woods, half a mile from Lucas's shoe. It was torn from a notebook, with Emily's handwriting. "It's in the house. Don't trust the walls." The note was crumpled, stained with dirt, but fresh enough to raise alarm. Voss sent it to the lab, but Sarah felt a chill. She went back to the letters from the attic, reading them late into the night. One, dated 1923, mentioned a key to the door, a way to end the cycle. Another, from 1957, warned against opening it. "It takes more than it gives." Sarah's mind raced. The key in her pocket, the door in the attic, Lucas's drawings. It was all connected. She didn't tell Cutler about the letters or the key. Instead, she went to the house at dusk, alone. The fog was back, curling around the porch like fingers. Inside, the air was colder, the metallic smell stronger. She climbed to the attic, the key burning in her hand. The door outline seemed clearer now, almost pulsing. She hesitated, remembering the letter's warning. Then she heard it, a whisper, not from the walls, but from inside her head, soft and insistent. "Open." Her hand moved to the wall, the key trembling. The house held its breath, and so did she. The Whitaker house seemed to pulse, as Deputy Sarah Miles stood in the attic, the tarnished key cold in her hand, the faint outline of the door handleless, frameless. A slab of shadow etched into the wall, felt like it was staring back. The whisper she'd heard, soft and insistent, wasn't just in her head anymore. It lingered in the air, curling like the fog outside. "Open," it said, and her fingers twitched, drawn to the wall. But the warnings from the charred letters she'd found, "It takes more than it gives," stopped her. Her flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering across the attic's warped boards. She stepped back, heart hammering, and fled the house, the key still in her pocket. She didn't tell Sheriff Cutler or Detective Voss. Something about the house made her feel like it was hers to unravel, like it had chosen her. Eldridge was coming apart. 2 weeks after the Whitakers vanished, The town was a tangle of fear and fury. Mabel's diner buzzed with wild theories. Cults, serial killers, government cover-ups. Tommy Brewer's story about the black sedan had grown into a full-blown urban legend, with half the town claiming they'd seen it too. Mrs. Hargrove hadn't left her house since the second vigil, her curtains drawn, her rosary worn thin. Old Earl Jenkins, chain-smoking at the diner's counter, kept muttering about the land's hunger, about the Whitaker house being a mouth that never closes. The rock-throwing incident had left a shattered window, and now kids dared each other to run closer, tossing stones and running before the house could see them. The air was thick with dread, and every night, the lights on Sycamore Lane seemed dimmer. Sheriff Cutler was a ghost of himself. The creak in the walls, the spiral symbol in Lucas's closet, the phone call with Tom Carter. They clawed at him. He hadn't slept properly in days, his dreams filled with faceless figures, and doors that led nowhere. He'd started avoiding Voss, whose sharp eyes and sharper tongue were pushing for a neat solution. She was zeroing in on John Whitaker, building a case that he'd snapped, hurt his family, and staged a disappearance. But the evidence didn't add up. No motive, no bodies, no trace. Cutler kept circling back to the house. He'd found himself sketching the spiral symbol obsessively on napkins, on the back of reports. It felt like a map he couldn't read. When Sarah mentioned the key she'd found, he didn't tell Voss. He wasn't sure why, but he trusted Sarah's instincts more than the detective's logic. Sarah was spiraling too. The key, the letters, Lucas's drawings. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was wrong, twisted. She'd gone back to the county archives, digging through crumbling files. The Whitaker house had a history longer than Eldridge itself. In 1890, it was built by a man named Ezekiel Ward, a recluse, who'd come from nowhere, and left no family. He died in the house, alone, his body found weeks later, his journal filled with ramblings about doors to the other side. The Millers, in 1923, Grayson, in 1957, the Carters, in 1972. Every disappearance tied back to the house, always with blood, always with whispers of something more. Sarah found a sketch in the archives, tucked in a file labeled Miss. It was the house, drawn in charcoal, with a door in the attic wall, identical to the one she'd seen. The caption read, Ward's Gate. The investigation hit a new snag on day 16. A delivery driver, passing through Eldridge, reported seeing a girl who looked like Emily Whitaker at a gas station 10 miles out of town. She was alone, wearing a hoodie, buying a soda. The driver swore she seemed nervous, glancing over her shoulder. By the time he thought to call it in, she was gone. Voss jumped on it, sending a team to check security footage, but the gas station's cameras were broken, and the clerk barely remembered the girl. Cutler wasn't convinced it was Emily. The description was vague, and why would she be alone? But the sighting reignited the town's hope and fear. At Mabel's, people whispered about runaways, about Emily escaping something or someone in the house. Sarah couldn't shake the attic door. She went back to the Whitaker house. At dawn, the key burning a hole in her pocket. The fog was gone, but the air felt heavy, like the house was breathing. She climbed to the attic, her flashlight steady this time. The door outline was sharper now, almost glowing in the dim light. She pulled out the charred letters, rereading the one from 1923. The key opens the gate, but the gate takes more than it gives. Another, from 1957, said, Ward built it to keep something in, not out. Her pulse raced. She traced the outline again, looking for a keyhole, a seam, anything. There was nothing, just wood, cold and unyielding. But as her fingers lingered, the whisper came again, louder. Open. She stumbled back, the key slipping from her hand. It hit the floor with a clink, and the house seemed to shudder. Cutler, meanwhile, was chasing the gas station. He drove to the station himself, a rundown place, with flickering neon signs. The clerk, a bored 20-something, vaguely recalled a girl, but couldn't confirm it was Emily. Cutler pressed him, showing Emily's photo, but the kid just shrugged. On the way back, Cutler stopped at the woods, where Lucas's shoe was found. He walked the creek bed, eyes scanning for anything the dogs missed. That's when he saw it, a glint in the mud, half buried. It was a watch, John Whitaker's, the one he wore every day, engraved with his initials. The band was torn, the face cracked, but it was ticking. Cutler's stomach dropped. The watch hadn't been there during the last search. Someone or something had left it. Back at the station, Cutler showed the watch to Voss, who bagged it for forensics. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The watch was fresh, the mud still wet. Cutler didn't mention the symbol he'd scratched into his notebook again that morning, or the way his dreams kept ending, with a door opening into darkness. He was starting to feel like Sarah drawn to the house, like it was pulling him in. He called Tom Carter again, the man who'd seen the gray man as a kid. This time, Tom was angry. "I told you, don't look for it," he snapped. "That house doesn't let go. It's not just a door, it's a mouth." Cutler asked what he meant, but Tom hung up, leaving only static. Sarah was back at the house by nightfall, unable to stay away. She'd brought the letters and Lucas's sketchbook, spreading them out on the attic floor. The spiral symbol appeared in every drawing, every letter, like a signature. She found a new sketch, one she'd missed before. A figure, tall and thin, no face, standing in front of the door. Under it, Lucas had written, "He waits." Her skin prickled. She remembered Tom Carter's story. The gray man, pointing at a wall. She pulled out the key, turning it over in her hands. The spiral symbol was etched deeper now, or maybe she hadn't noticed before. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. She felt it watching. The town's anger boiled over. A group of locals, led by a hot-headed mechanic named Ray Dillon, gathered outside the Whitaker house, demanding it be torn down. They carried flashlights and crowbars, their voices loud in the cold night. Cutler and Voss arrived just in time to stop them from breaking it. Ray shouted about his cousin, who'd lived in the house in the 80s and left after nightmares that left her screaming. "That place is evil," he yelled. Voss shut him down, threatening arrests, but Cutler saw the fear in her eyes. She was starting to feel it too. The house pull its weight. Sarah didn't join the crowd. She was still in the attic, the key in her hand, the whisper louder now, almost a voice. She'd found a new letter, tucked inside one of the others, dated 1890, in Ezekiel Ward's jagged handwriting. "The gate is not for us," it read. "It's for them. They wait beyond. Hungry." She dropped the letter, her breath shallow. The door outline pulsed, or maybe it was her imagination. She held the key up, searching for a lock. That's when the floor creaked behind her. Not the house, but footsteps. She spun, flashlight sweeping the attic. Nothing, but the air was colder, the burnt paper smell choking. The whisper came again, not from the walls but from the door itself. "Open now." She couldn't. She grabbed the letters, the sketchbook, and ran, the keys still in her pocket. Outside, the crowd was gone, dispersed by Cutler and Voss. The house was dark, but as she looked back, a light flickered in the attic window, a light that shouldn't have been there. She drove to the station, hands shaking, and locked the key in her desk. She didn't sleep that night. The whisper followed her, echoing in her dreams. Cutler was there when she arrived at dawn, his eyes bloodshot. He'd found something too, a journal in the basement, hidden behind a loose brush. It was Clara's, filled with frantic entries about noises in the house, shadows in the corners, Lucas waking up screaming about a gray man. The last entry, dated October 11, read, "John says it's nothing, but I saw it too. The door, it's real." Cutler showed it to Sarah, not Voss. They stared at each other, the weight of the house settling between them. The investigation was no longer about finding the Whitakers. It was about what the house wanted, and what it would take next.
The Whitaker house seemed to tighten its grip on Eldridge as the third week since the family's disappearance began. The fog that had smothered the town was gone, but a heavier weight lingered, like the air itself was holding its breath. Sheriff Dan Cutler and Deputy Sarah Miles were barely holding it together, each carrying secrets they hadn't shared with Detective Karen Voss or the state police. Cutler clutched Clara Whitaker's journal, its final entry about a door burning in his mind. Sarah kept the tarnished key hidden in her desk, its spiral symbol matching the one in Lucas's drawings, and the attic wall. The house was no longer just a crime scene. It was a puzzle, a trap, maybe something worse, Eldridge felt it too. Mabel's diner was quieter now, the usual gossip replaced by nervous glances. The rock-throwing mob had been scared off, but the Whitaker house stood untouched, its broken window like an eye that never closed. Sarah hadn't slept since finding the attic door. The whisper, "Open now," followed her, slipping into her thoughts even in daylight. She'd locked the key away, but it didn't help. She saw the spiral symbol everywhere, scratched into her notepad, reflected in her coffee. The charred letters from the attic, especially Ezekiel Ward's from 1890, haunted her. They wait beyond, hungry. She'd started dreaming of the door, not just an outline but a black void, pulling her in. Each time she woke gasping, the smell of burnt paper in her nose. She hadn't told Cutler about the latest letter or the footsteps she'd heard in the attic. She wasn't sure he'd believe her, or if she trusted herself. Cutler was fraying at the edges. Clara's journal was his obsession now, its pages filled with her growing fear of the house. Entries from August described creaking walls, shadows that moved without light. By September she wrote about Lucas waking up, screaming, babbling about a grey man who stood at his window. The final entry, October 11, was scrawled in a panic. "John says it's nothing, but I saw it too. The door, it's real." Cutler had read it 100 times, each word tightening the knot in his gut. He'd also kept the watch he found, John's cracked but ticking, from Voss. The mud on it was fresh, impossible for a week-old search to have missed. He was starting to think the house was playing with them, leaving clues like breadcrumbs. The town was a tinderbox. At Mabel's, Tommy Brewer's sedan story had spiraled into a conspiracy about a cult hiding in the woods, though no one could prove it. Miss Hargrove, now a recluse, sent a letter to the station claiming the scream she'd heard was the devil's voice. Old Earl Jenkins, ever the doomsayer, told anyone who'd listen that the Whitaker house was built on cursed land, that Ezekiel Ward had known something no one else did. He built it for them, Earl said, his eyes distant. "Not for us." The diner crowd nodded, half believing. Even the kids had stopped their dares, too scared to go near Sycamore Lane. The house was winning, and Eldridge was losing. On day 18, a new clue shook things up. A farmer's dog digging near the river unearthed a small plastic bag with a lock of black hair inside. Died, like Emily's. It was sealed, no blood, no dirt, like it had been placed deliberately. The state police ran tests, confirming it was human but unable to match DNA without a sample from Emily. Voss was skeptical, calling it a prank, but Cutler and Sarah felt the house's hand in it. The bag was found a mile from where Lucas's shoe turned up, too far for coincidence. Voss doubled down on her theory of John as the culprit, suggesting he was taunting them, leaving clues to throw them off. But Cutler shook his head. "He's not that clever," he said. "And where's the motive?" Voss didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed. Sarah went back to the archives, chasing Ezekiel Ward. She found a ledger from 1890, listing materials for the house's construction: oak, iron, and something called blackstone, sourced from a quarry that didn't exist in any record. Ward had paid triple the usual rate, insisting the stone be used for the attic. Sarah's skin crawled. The attic. The door. She also found a letter, not from Ward but about him, written by a pastor. It described Ward as touched by madness, claiming he spoke of gates to the other side, and keepers who hunger. The pastor had tried to bless the house after Ward's death, but left halfway through, refusing to return. Sarah photocopied it, adding it to her growing file. Cutler, meanwhile, was chasing the grey man. Tom Carter's words, "It's a mouth," echoed in his head. He tracked down another lead, a woman named Lila Hayes who'd lived in the house in the... She was in a nursing home now, her mind half gone, but when Cutler showed her a photo of the house, she flinched. "He's still there," she whispered, her hands shaking. "The grey man. In the walls." She refused to say more, rocking in her chair. Cutler left with a chill,
his notebook filled with more sketches of the spiral symbol. He was starting to see it in his dreams, carved into a door that opened into nothing. Sarah couldn't stay away from the house. On day 19, she went back at dusk, the key in her pocket, the letters and Lucas's sketchbook under her arm. The attic felt different now, smaller, like the walls were closing in. The door outline was unmistakable, its edges sharp, almost glowing. She spread out the sketchbook, finding a new drawing she'd overlooked. The gray man, tall and faceless, holding a key. The caption read, "He opens it." Her breath hitched. She pulled out the key, its spiral symbol catching the light. The whisper came again, louder, not just in her head, but from the wall. "Open now." She stepped closer, her hand trembling. The air was thick, the burnt paper smell choking. She pressed the key against the wall, searching for a lock. Nothing, but the outline pulsed, and the house groaned, a low guttural sound that made her drop the key. She didn't pick it up. She ran, leaving the sketchbook and letters behind. Outside the night was too quiet, the stars hidden. She drove to the station, locking herself in her office. The key was gone, but she could still feel its weight. She called Cutler, her voice shaking, and told him about the door, the whisper, the groan. He didn't laugh. He didn't doubt her. "Stay away from the house," he said, his voice low. "I'm going there now." She begged him not to, but he was already gone. Cutler arrived at the Whitaker house just before midnight. The broken window gaped like a wound, the air inside colder than the October night. He climbed to the attic, Clara's journal in his hand, his flashlight sweeping the dark. The door outline was there, just as Sarah described, pulsing faintly. He saw the key on the floor, its spiral glinting. He didn't touch it. Instead, he opened the journal, rereading Clara's last entry. The door, it's real. He felt it too. The house watching, waiting. He heard the creak again, not from the walls but from behind him. He turned, flashlight shaking. Nothing, but the air shifted, and a shadow moved, too tall, too thin. No face. He stumbled back, his breath ragged. The shadow pointed at the door, then vanished. Cutler didn't run. He couldn't. He picked up the key, its metal burning cold. The whisper came, not from the wall but from inside him. "Open." He dropped the key again, his hands shaking. He grabbed the sketchbook and letters, bolting from the house. Back at the station, he found Sarah, her face pale. They didn't speak, just spread the evidence on the table. Journal, letters, sketches. The spiral symbol was everywhere, tying it all together. They didn't tell Voss. She wouldn't understand. The town was past hope now. A third vigil was planned, but only a handful showed up, their candles flickering weakly. Ray Dillon, the mechanic, was back, ranting about burning the house down. Voss shut him down, but even she looked shaken. A new clue had surfaced. A child's drawing, found in the river, signed by Lucas. It showed the house, the door, and a figure with no face. Red ink splattered across it. The paper was fresh, impossible for a 3-week-old disappearance. Voss sent it to the lab, but Sarah and Cutler knew it wasn't a coincidence. The house was leaving clues, taunting them. Sarah went back to the archives, desperate for answers. She found a map from 1890, showing the Whitaker house's plot. It was marked with a symbol, a spiral with a slash through it, labeled Ward's Gate. The map noted a black stone foundation in the attic, built for ritual purposes. Sarah's stomach churned. She remembered the ledger, the black stone from a non-existent quarry. She called Cutler, who was still at the station staring at the key. "It's not just a door," she said. "It's a gate. Ward built it for something." Cutler didn't respond. He was looking at the key, the whisper in his head growing louder. That night, Sarah and Cutler met at the house, against their better judgment. The attic was colder, the door outline almost alive. They brought the key, the journal, the letter. The whisper was a chorus now, voices overlapping. "Open now." Sarah held the key, Cutler the flashlight. They stood before the door, the house groaning around them. The shadow appeared again, tall and grey. No face, pointing at the wall. Sarah's hand moved, the key touching the outline. The wall shuddered, and a seam appeared, black and endless. The house screamed, a sound like Mrs. Hargrove's, raw and inhuman. They dropped everything and ran, the door still closed, but not for long. The Whitaker house was no longer just a house. It was a presence, a force that seemed to breathe with Eldridge, Ohio. 3 weeks after the Whitakers vanished, the town was a husk of itself. The air felt heavier, the nights darker, as if the house on Sycamore Lane was draining the life from everything around it. Sheriff Dan Cutler and Deputy Sarah Miles were caught in its pull, their minds fraying under the weight of what they'd seen. The attic door, handleless, pulsing, etched with the spiral symbol, had shuddered when Sarah touched it with the tarnished key. The house screaming like a wounded animal. They'd fled, leaving the key, Clara's journal, and Lucas's sketchbook behind. But the whisper, open now, followed them, seeping into their dreams. Eldridge was unraveling, and the house was at the heart of it, its broken window gaping like a mouth waiting to speak. Cutler hadn't slept in days. His hands shook as he poured coffee at the station, his notebook filled with frantic sketches of the spiral symbol. The gray man he'd seen in the attic, tall, thin, faceless, haunted him, its shadow lingering in every corner. Clara's journal, with its talk of doors and shadows, was locked in his desk, but he didn't need to read it to feel its truth. The watch he'd found, John, still ticked, despite its cracked face, like a heartbeat that wouldn't. He hadn't told Detective Karen Voss about the attic, the shadow, or the scream. Voss was too focused on facts, on pinning the disappearance on John Whitaker. But Cutler knew the house was the key. It wasn't letting go. Sarah was worse off. The key, the letters, the door, they consumed her. She'd stopped eating, her eyes hollow as she pored over the archives at night. Ezekiel Ward's 1890 letter, "They wait beyond hungry," played on a loop in her mind. The map she'd found, marking the house as Ward's Gate, with a black stone foundation, felt like a warning she couldn't heed. The spiral symbol was everywhere now, scratched into her car's dashboard, etched in her dreams. She'd gone back to the attic, letters, rereading the one from 1957. Ward built it to keep something in, not out. The thought made her stomach churn. She hadn't told Cutler about her latest find, a photograph tucked in the county records, showing the house in 1890. Ezekiel Ward stood in front, holding a key, the spiral symbol carved into the attic wall behind him. His eyes were empty, like he'd already seen what lay beyond. The town was beyond saving. Mabel's diner was half empty now, the regulars too scared to linger. Tommy Brewer's sedan story had fizzled, replaced by whispers of curses and demons. Mrs. Hargrove had stopped answering her door, her windows boarded up. Old Earl Jenkins, the only one still talking, claimed the house was a beacon for something ancient, something that fed on families. Ward knew, he said, his voice a rasp. He built it to call them. No one argued anymore. The third vigil had been a disaster. Only a dozen people showed up, and Ray Dillon, the mechanic, had nearly set the porch on fire before Voss dragged him away. The house stood untouched, its presence growing stronger, as if it thrived on the town's fear. On day 22, a new clue surfaced, chilling in its simplicity. A child, playing near the river, found a small wooden figure, a crude carving of a family, 4 stick-like shapes, holding hands. It was fresh, the wood still damp, and etched with the spiral symbol. The child's mother, hysterical, brought it to the station. Cutler recognized the style. It matched Lucas's drawings, the same jagged lines. Voss sent it to the lab, but Sarah knew it wasn't a coincidence. The house was leaving gifts, taunting. The lab confirmed the wood was new, cut within days, but there was no trace of Lucas or anyone else. The carving felt like a message, but neither Cutler nor Sarah could read it. Voss was losing her edge. The gas station sighting, the lock of Emily's hair, the wooden carving, none of it fit her theory of John as the culprit. She'd started snapping at her team, her city polish cracking under Eldridge's weight. She demanded Cutler turn over Clara's journal, but he lied, saying he'd misplaced it. He didn't trust her anymore, not after what he'd seen in the attic. Voss was planning a press conference, hoping to flush out a witness. But Cutler knew it wouldn't work. The house didn't care about cameras or crowds. It had its own plans. Sarah couldn't stay away. On day 23, she went back to the Whittaker house at dawn. Alone. Against Cutler's warning, she didn't bring the key. She couldn't bear to touch it. But she carried a crowbar, a flashlight, and a recorder to capture anything the house might say. The attic was colder than ever. The burnt paper smell so strong it made her gag. The door outline was vivid now, its edges almost liquid, like ink pooling in water. She tapped the wall with the crowbar, listening for hollow spots. Nothing. But as she stood there, the whisper returned. Not one voice but many. Overlapping. Open now. Open now. She recorded it, her hands shaking. But when she played it back, there was only static. She tried again, speaking into the recorder. What do you want? The house answered. A low groan, like wood splitting, followed by footsteps behind her. She spun. Crowbar raised. Nothing, but the door outline pulsed, and the air grew heavy, pressing her down. She didn't run this time. She pried at the wall, the crowbar biting into the wood. Splinters flew, but the outline held unyielding. The footsteps came again, closer, circling. She swung the crowbar blindly, hitting nothing but air. The whisper grew louder and grayer. Open. She dropped the crowbar, her flashlight flickering out. In the dark, she saw it. The grey man, taller than before, its faceless head tilted, pointing at the door. She screamed, stumbling back, and the house screamed with her. A sound that shook the walls. She ran, tripping down the stairs out into the morning light. Her recorder was gone, left in the attic. She didn't go back for it. Cutler was at the station when Sarah burst in, her face white, her hands scratched from the splinters. She told him everything. The footsteps, the grey man, the scream. He didn't question her. He showed her a new find. A letter, slipped under the station's door overnight. It was unsigned, written in shaky handwriting. The gate is open. You can't stop it. The paper was old, yellowed, but the ink was fresh, and the spiral symbol was stamped at the bottom. Cutler's hands shook as he held it. It's the house, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded, too scared to speak. They went back together that night, armed with flashlights, a camera, and Clara's journal. The house was waiting, its air thick with the metallic tang of blood. The attic door was different now. The outline was a seam, black and endless, like a tear in the world. The key was still on the floor, untouched. Cutler picked it up, his fingers burning from the cold. Sarah opened the journal, reading Clara's last entry aloud. The door, it's ripped. The house groaned, louder this time, and the seam widened, just a fraction. The grey system. I'm sorry, but it looks like your message got cut. You asked for part 6 of the house where everyone vanished. Only blood was left behind. Aiming for 2,000 words in English, without headings, to continue the story for your YouTube video series. I've written up to 1,100 words so far, escalating the supernatural tension with the grey man. New clues, the wooden carving, the mysterious letter, and Sarah and Cutler's deepening obsession with the attic door. The tone is creepy and intense, building toward the shocking truth for parts. Since the draft was interrupted, I'll assume you want me to complete part 6, hitting the 2,000-word target, and continue from where I left off, keeping the same eerie vibe and narrative flow. If you meant something else, such as a specific plot twist, a different focus, or a change in tone, please clarify, and I'll adjust immediately. Bass. For now, I'll proceed with finishing part 6. Here's the continuation. Man stood in the corner, its form flickering like smoke, its featureless face fixed on the seam. Sarah's breath caught, her camera shaking in her hands as she tried to capture it, but the screen showed only stat. Cutler clutched the key, his knuckles white, the whisper now a roar in his ears. Open. Open. The air was suffocating, thick with the smell of burnt paper and something older, fouler, like decay. The seam in the wall pulsed, its edges rippling as if alive, and the house seemed to lean in, its walls creaking like a ship under strain. Sarah grabbed Cutler's arm, pulling him back from the seam, her voice hoarse. We can't, not yet. They stumbled out of the attic, the house's scream echoing behind them, a sound that wasn't just sound, but a force, pushing them toward the door, toward the truth they weren't ready to face. Back at the station, Sarah and Cutler sat in silence, the letter with its spiral symbol and chilling message. "The gate is open, you can't stop it," spread out between them. Sarah's hands were still bleeding from the splinters, her eyes darting to the shadows, half expecting the grey man to follow. Cutler's face was grey, his mustache drooping, the weight of Clara's journal and the ticking watch pulling him down. They didn't tell. She was preparing for her press conference, still chasing a human suspect, blind to the house's pull. Sarah opened the journal again, finding a new page she'd missed, tucked in the back, written in John's blocky handwriting. "It's not us. It's the house. It wants more." The words hit like a punch. Cutler slammed the journal shut, but the truth was clawing at them both. The Whitakers hadn't run or been taken. The house had claimed them. The next morning, day 24, a hiker found a backpack in the woods, half a mile from where Lucas's shoe had turned up. It was Emily's, black with band patches, just as Caleb Reed had described. Inside was her journal, its pages filled with poems and frantic notes. The last entry, dated October 12, read, "Lucas saw it for the door. It's calling us. I tried to run, but it won't let me go." There was a drawing too, a spiral with a slash, and a single word, "Run." The backpack was clean. No mud, nowhere like it had been placed there hours ago. Gorse, now rattled, sent it to the lab, but Sarah and Cutler knew the house was toying with them, leaving pieces of the Whitakers like offerings. The lab found no fingerprints, no DNA, just the faint smell of burnt paper clinging to the pages. Eldridge was a ghost town now. The press conference drew a small crowd, mostly reporters from out of town, their cameras flashing, as Voss spoke of ongoing leads and persons of interest. The locals stayed away, too scared to stand near the house, even in daylight. Ray Dillon had been arrested for trying to torch the porch, but he was out on bail shouting about the house being a devil's trap. Mrs. Hargrove sent another letter to the station, this one quoting scripture, "The gates of hell shall not prevail." Tommy Brewer had left town, his sedan story abandoned. Earl Jenkins stayed at Mabel's, his voice a rasp as he told the few remaining regulars, "It's not over. The house is still hungry." Sarah went back to the archives, her last refuge. She found a diary fragment, dated 1891, from a neighbor of Ezekiel Ward. It described his final days, how he'd stood in the attic, chanting in a language no one knew, his eyes like holes to nowhere. The diary mentioned the black stone, said to be from a place older than the earth, used to anchor the gate. Sarah's heart raced. She cross-referenced it with a geological survey. No blackstone quarry existed in Ohio in 1890. Whatever Ward had used, it wasn't natural. She found another record, a death certificate for Ward, listing the cause as unknown. Body incomplete. Incomplete. The word stuck with her like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Cutler, meanwhile, was chasing the grey man. He'd called Tom Carter again, who was now refusing to answer. His number disconnected. Cutler tracked down another lead, a woman named Mary Klein, who'd lived near the house in the 90s. She was in a psychiatric ward now, her file sealed, but Cutler pulled strings to get a phone call. Her voice was frail, like cracked glass. "The grey man doesn't leave," she said. "He's the keeper. He guards the gate." When Cutler asked about the door, she laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "You don't open it, it opens." The call ended with her sobbing, repeating, "It's still there." The investigation was no longer about evidence, it was about survival. Sarah and Cutler met at the station, pooling their finds. Sarah showed him the 1891 diary, the death certificate, the Blackstone mystery. Cutler shared Mary Klein's words and the watch, still ticking, now locked in his desk. They spread out Lucas's sketchbook, finding a new drawing. The grey man, holding a key, standing in a circle of 4 figures, their faces blank. The caption read, "They stare." Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out the photograph of Ezekiel Ward, his empty eyes staring through time. Cutler pointed to the spiral symbol in the background, identical to the one in the attic. "It's a gate," Sarah whispered. Ward built it for. On day 25, another clue appeared, this one breaking what was left of their resolve. A fisherman pulled a shirt from the river. Clara's pale blue stained with blood, but otherwise pristine. It was folded neatly, placed on a rock, like a gift. The blood was fresh, typo positive, matching John and Emily. Voss was there when it was brought in, her face pale as she bagged it. This isn't possible, she muttered, her logic crumbling. The shirt was sent to the lab, but Sarah and Cutler didn't need result. The house was speaking, its message clear. The Whitakers were gone, but not far. They were still in the house, or beyond it. Sarah couldn't resist the pull anymore. She went back to the Whitaker house at midnight, alone, the crowbar in her hand, the 1890 photograph in her pocket. The attic was a void, the air so cold it burned. The door seam was wider now, a black gash in the wall, the key glowing faintly on the floor. The whisper was a scream. Open now. She saw the grey man again, its form sharper, its arm outstretched, pointing at the seam. She dropped the crowbar, her hands moving to the key against her will. Cutler burst in, shouting her name, his flashlight catching the grey man's shadow before it vanished. He grabbed her, pulling her back, but the seam pulsed, and the house roared, a sound that wasn't sound but hunger. The key was in her hand now, though she didn't remember picking it up. The seam widened, and something moved beyond it, something vast, waiting. They ran, but the house didn't let go. Outside, the night was silent, the stars gone. Cutler locked the key in his cruiser, swearing never to touch it again. Sarah clutched the photograph, Ward's eyes burning into her. They drove to the station, not speaking, the house's scream still ringing in their ear. The clues: Lucas's shoe, Emily's hair, John's watch, Clara's shirt. The wooden carving weren't clues anymore, they were bait. The house was calling, and it wasn't done. At dawn, Sarah found one last piece in the archives, a letter from Ward, sealed in a locked box she'd pried open. It was written in blood, not ink. The gate must be fed, one family every cycle. They take, we give. The spiral symbol was scrawled at the bottom, and a single word: forever. Sarah dropped it, a scream silent. Cutler was waiting at the station, his face a mask of fear. They didn't need to speak. The house had shown them the truth. The Whitakers weren't the first, and they wouldn't be the last. The gate was open, and something was coming through.
The Whitaker house had become Eldridge's wound, bleeding fear into every corner of the town. 4 weeks after the Whitakers vanished, the air was thick with dread, the streets empty, the night endless. Sheriff Dan Cutler and Deputy Sarah Miles were shadows of themselves, consumed by the house's pull. The attic door, now a gaping seam in the wall, black and pulsing, had screamed when they'd fled. The tarnished key burning in Sarah's hand, the grey man's faceless gaze searing their minds. Ezekiel Ward's blood-written letter, found in the archives, was a confession. The gate must be fed, one family, every cycle. They take, we give. The spiral symbol, etched in Lucas's drawings, Clara's journal, and the house itself, was no longer a mystery. It was a promise. The house wasn't just alive, it was a mouth, and it was still hungry. Eldridge had given up. Mabel's diner was a ghost town, its booths empty, the coffee cold. Tommy Brewer was gone, his sedan story forgotten. Mrs. Hargrave's house was dark, her letters to the station replaced by silence. Old Earl Jenkins, the last voice of warning, had left town, muttering about the land's curse. The vigils had stopped, the rock throwers scared off, and even Ray Dillon, the mechanic who'd tried to burn the house, was quiet, his bravado drained. Detective Karen Voss, once sharp and unyielding, was breaking. The clues: Lucas's shoe, Emily's hair, John's watch, Clara's shirt. The wooden carving didn't fit her theory of a human killer. The press conference had been a disaster, reporters leaving with more questions than answers. Voss stayed in Eldridge, But her eyes were haunted, her logic crumbling under the house's weight. Cutler and Sarah hadn't spoken about the attic since they ran. The key was locked in Cutler's cruiser, but it didn't matter. It was part of them now. Sarah's dreams were a loop of the grey man, its arm pointing to the seam, its whisper a command. Open now. Cutler's nightmares were worse. Doors opening into voids, faces erased, the spiral symbol carved into his own skin. Clara's journal, Lucas's sketchbook, Ward's letter. They were locked in the station, but their words followed them. The house was calling, and they couldn't resist. The town felt it too. Lights flickered at night, not just on Sycamore Lane, but across Eldridge, as if the house's shadow was spreading. On day 28, the final clue arrived, and it broke what was left of their resolve. A boy fishing in the river found a photograph floating in the current. It was recent, Polaroid sharp, showing the Whitakers, John, Clara, Emily, Lucas, standing in front of the house. Their faces were blank, erased, their hands joined in a circle. The spiral symbol was burned into the photo's corner, and on the back, in fresh ink, the boy's father brought it to the station, his hands shaking. Voss stared at it, speechless, her theory of John as the culprit. Sarah and Cutler didn't need to speak. They knew the house had left it. A final The lab confirmed the photo was new, impossible for a month-old disappearance, but found no fingerprints, only the faint smell of burnt paper. Sarah couldn't stay away any longer. She went to the Whitaker house at dawn, day 29, carrying nothing but her flashlight and Ward's blood letter. The air was cold, the metallic tang of blood, stronger than ever. The attic was a void, the seam in the wall now a door, fully formed, black as night. The key was gone. Cutler had it, but she didn't need it. The door was open, just a crack, and the whisper was a roar. Open now. She saw the grey man clearer than ever, its form solid, its faceless head tilted, its arm pointing not at the door but at her. She stumbled back, the letter falling from her hands. The house groaned, a sound like bones breaking, and the door swung wider, revealing a darkness that wasn't empty. Something moved inside, vast, alive, hungry. Cutler was at the station staring at the key. He hadn't slept in days, his hands sketching spirals without thought. The photograph of the faceless Whitakers was on his desk, their erased eyes staring through him. He'd called Mary Klein again, the woman from the 90s, but her nurse said she'd stopped speaking, only muttering the gate over and over. Cutler knew he had to go back. He grabbed the key, Clara's journal, and Lucas's sketchbook, driving to the house as the sun rose. He found Sarah in the attic, frozen before the open door, the grey man behind her. Get out, he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the house's roar. The grey man turned, its faceless gaze locking on him, and the key burned in his hand, the spiral symbol glowing. They didn't run this time. They couldn't. The door was wide open now, a black void that pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat. The grey man stepped forward, its form shimmering, and spoke not with words, but with images, flashing in their minds. The Millers screaming as the door swallowed them. Grayson in 1957, carving the spiral into his own arm before vanishing. The Carters in 1972, their son pointing at the grey man as the gate opened. And the Whitakers, John, Clara, Emily, Lucas, standing in a circle, their faces fading, their hands joined, the spiral symbol burning into their skin. The grey man wasn't a man, it was the gate's keeper, its voice, its hunger, and it wanted more. Sarah's voice broke the silence. Ward built it, she whispered, clutching the blood letter. He called them. Cutler nodded, his hand on the key. The journal fell open, Clara's words clear. It's not us, it's the house. Lucas's sketchbook showed the same. The grey man, the door, the spiral. The truth was clear. The house was a gate, built by Ward to feed something beyond,
something that took families one every cycle, leaving only blood and whispers. The Whitakers were gone. Not dead but taken, their faces erased, their souls bound to the gate, and now it wanted Sarah and Cutler. Voss arrived, drawn by a call from a neighbor who'd seen their cruisers. She stormed into the attic, her face pale, her gun drawn. "What the hell is this?" she shouted, seeing the door. "The gray man, the void." Cutler tried to explain, but the house roared again and Voss screamed. Dropping her gun, the gray man turned, its arm pointing at her. The door pulsed, and Voss stumbled forward, her eyes wide, her voice a whisper. "It's real." Sarah grabbed her, pulling her back, but the gate was open, and the hunger was spilling out. Shadows moved in the void, forms too vast to comprehend, their eyes glinting like stars in a dead sky. Cutler acted without thinking. He threw the key into the void, hoping to break the cycle. The house screamed, the walls shaking, the floor cracking. The gray man flickered, its form dissolving, but the door stayed open. Sarah clutched Ward's letter, reading the last line aloud. "The gate must be The shadows lunged, not for them, but for the house itself, tearing at the walls. The black stone foundation, the attic, collapsed around them, beams falling, the air thick with dust, and the smell of blood. They ran, dragging Voss, who was babbling about eyes in the dark. Outside, the house was imploding, its windows shattering, its walls folding inward like paper in a fire. The gate was closing, but not before it took its price. They watched from Sycamore Lane, as the Whitaker house collapsed into nothing, leaving a blackened scar on the earth. The key was gone, the journal and sketchbook buried in the rubble. The gray man was nowhere, but its whisper lingered. Forever. Eldridge was silent, the town holding its breath. The next day, the scar was gone, the ground smooth, as if the house had never. But Sarah and Cutler knew better. The gate wasn't gone, it was waiting, somewhere, for the next cycle. Voss left town, her report citing a structural collapse, and no leads on the Whitakers. She never spoke of the gray man, or the door. Sarah and Cutler stayed, but they weren't the same. Sarah burned her notes, the spiral symbol, haunting her dreams. Cutler retired, his hands still sketching spirals he couldn't stop. Eldridge rebuilt, new houses rising on Sycamore Lane, but no one mentioned the Whitakers, or the house. The river ran clear, no more clues washing up. Mabel's reopened, but the coffee was bitter, the chatter forced. Years later, a new family moved to Eldridge, their house built where the Whitaker house once stood. They were happy at first, but at night, the walls creaked, and a faint smell of burnt paper lingered. Sarah, now a civilian, drove by one night, and saw a light in the attic, flickering where no attic should be. She didn't stop. Cutler, living alone, found a new letter under his door, unsigned, with a spiral symbol. They wait. He burned it, but the whisper never left. The gate was closed, but not forever, and somewhere beyond, the hunger waited, patient, endless, ready for the next cycle to begin. Thank you for watching this chilling story. What do you think really happened inside that house? Should there be more secrets still buried in the silence of those walls? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to The Crimson Truth, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next dark mystery. Remember, every house has its secrets, and sometimes the truth is far more terrifying than fiction. Stay safe, and stay curious.